between a gangster and a respectable bankster ain't much. Gangsters rob banks, and banksters rob everyone else. But all of this ain't nothing in comparison to the real banking scandal. Did you know that the government gives the banks here the right to generate billions of pounds in loans with feck all money to back any of it up? Funny money loans that are hardly worth the paper they're written on. Come on, I'll give you an economics lesson. Fractional reserve lending is a fancy term used by banks to describe how they literally create money out of thin air. And here's how it works. This here is Mr. and Mrs. Millstone, and they're hoping to buy this beautiful £100,000 house here, and they hope they get the money from the bank. Now, using fractional reserve lending, the bank is legally allowed to loan out 10 times more money than it actually possesses. So the bank only has to risk £10,000, which they use to write a cheque for 100 grand, which they give to Mr. and Mrs. Millstone, and they in turn give it to the builder. In theory, the bank ought to use their own 10 grand to back up the loan. They don't, however. They're not that stupid. They usually get the money off people like the Millstones in the form of a 10% deposit. So what about the cheque for the 100 grand that the builder got? What about that? Surely that's good. He can spend it, can't he? Well, yes, he can. And if he goes to the bank, he should get cash for it. You see, the problem is that if every person who got a cheque from the bank tried to cash it, there just wouldn't be enough money in the bank to cover 90% of them. Of course, that's something the banks hope never happens.
It became known as the Celtic Tiger, Ireland's economy awash with cash off the back of 2 decades of cheap credit and low income tax. The Celtic Tiger is dead. The streets of Dublin still gleam, the Tiger's legacy, but with jobs disappearing by the 1,000 each week, welfare queues are forming.
More than 100 job seekers have gathered here, waiting in the cold for the unemployment agency to open. It looks like things are only going to get worse. The public deficit has steadily worsened in recent months, and state coffers are empty.
The Celtic Tiger is not just dead, I think it's extinct. We're never going to go back to the era of 7, 8, 10% growth.
When the crash came at the end of 2008, Ireland's banks were ill prepared. The country's debt rose from 10% of GDP to 60% within 5 years.
But the government has bigger concerns, among them dwindling tax revenues that once drew heavily on a burgeoning property and construction market, now at a standstill. There's little disguising the fact that accommodation built cheap and sold for easy profit in the good times is going nowhere now. Crashing prices means the wealth accumulated in property nationwide was, for many, just an illusion.
Certain people who seem to be in power, well, tangentially in power, don't seem to me to know what they're doing. I was pretty much vilified a few years ago by saying this would happen, that we would have this huge crash.
In a society which is massively unequal, that a substantial part of the readjustment, of the correction of the mistakes of the wealthy should be borne by the poorest seems to me to be utterly unjust. There is absolute political will here to further, to make the lives of people who are already poor even poorer. There is a political will to do that. There is no political will to take on the people who are rich, who have the resources, if distributed, to get us out of this crisis. The people who made fortunes during the boom years, there's no will to say to them, you made the fortunes during the boom years, now let you pay for the crisis. Is it remotely surprising that these people are utterly insensitive to the needs and the concerns of poorer people? No, it isn't. It was utterly predictable.
On the budgetary front, clearly we have a big challenge there because government receipts are lagging well behind government expenditures. And we're now about to publish in November a 4-year plan, and the first instalment of that will be in the December budget.
A lot of anticipation about that budget. I know you were at the IMF meetings over this past week, and you were quoted there in the press as saying that there will be above €3 billion in spending cuts and tax increases for 2011. Where is that money coming from?
I do want to make it clear that the corporation tax of 12.5% will stay intact.
What's going to happen to the bondholders of Anglo-Irish?
In Irish and English law, we still have the position that senior bondholders rank the same as depositors. So were you to apply a haircut, it would have to be applied to depositors as well, and that's just not a viable proposition.
If you look at the Irish economy, it's going through the same kind of issues that we are in the United States and they are in England and basically around the world. There were people who, bankers or whatever, that made bad loans. They did that all over the world.
The Irish central bank says its bailout of the Anglo-Irish Bank, the country's biggest, will cost even more than hitherto had been thought. It's thought the full amount could reach 34 billion euros. Vicky, a very good afternoon to you. This really must be causing a few jitters there.
It is indeed, as you rightly say, 34 billion euro. Not what everybody was expecting way back early in 2009 when the Anglo-Irish Bank was first nationalised. A few billion, maybe up to 4 billion was the estimate then. This is now raised to 34 billion. People are extremely angry. The real feeling here on the streets it's from people is how they feel they're going to have to continue to pay this for generations, that their children and their grandchildren are going to bear the brunt of these bailouts.
Horrifyingly, this massive expansion of credit was a very giddy and stupid excess stampede of credit and money into loans that have turned out to be nothing but a bubble, and it's burst. Fractional reserving. By fractional reserving, we can give the example of how it happens. A bank takes in a deposit of €100, and with that deposit, it will decide to advance €86.50 in a loan from the resources of that deposit. They keep back the reserve, €13.50. That's the fractional reserve. It's the 13.5% of every time deposits come into the bank they hold back in order to meet the calls, because not everybody who has deposits with the bank will want their money in a short period of time.